Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. A quote from Soren Johnson, one of the minds behind Civilization 3 and 4, and Spore. But I suppose we've all got a Spore somewhere on our resume, right? It's a discussion-inspiring quote, and it's super famous, and unfortunately it's often stripped from a lot of its surrounding context. It's a powerful string of words that easily makes people feel a bunch of different ways, and gamers are nothing if not extremely level-headed and known to never fly off the rails about things they're missing the context of. If you want to be glib about it, it's easy to argue both for and against the sentiment in its exact words. I like the quote because it lets everyone feel smart about their interpretation of it. Of course, gamers are left-brain freaks who would rather see the code and processes than what's on screen. Translucent skinned ghouls who care more about ranking than having an entire wall unblemished by fist-sized holes. I'm above the other G-slurs because I think this. And also, wow, this is a brilliant game dev and he's totally wrong about this and doesn't even understand the basics. Optimization is a means to an end and cracking the code therein is both fun and rewarding. So what do I think? What's my take on this that makes me feel superior for having? My take is you're both right, and you're very beautiful, and you should kiss me. I think the quote is accurate, and importantly, it doesn't actually make any judgments about what players find fun, only what devs intend to be fun. Johnson is aware of this, but there's an obvious lament for other parts of the game being thrown to the wayside once the good thing is figured out. All games with serious math hidden somewhere in their most important systems have a hyper-analytical aspect to them once you get into it. It's why every mom in 2006 was a certified capital G gamer. Capital G goons playing single-player AAA titles feeling big dick because they made Nathan Drake successfully jump a gap that's impossible to fuck up. Love to talk shit about the 72-year-old playing Farmville for it not being a real game, despite its rabid and borderline insane fanbase rocking with honest-to-God spreadsheets of optimal growing patterns for their virtual radishes, or something like that. I don't know, I never played Farmville, but people were crazy about it. As video games progressed and we moved away from literal high scores being a tangible measurement of anything anyone actually cared about, that high score feeling never actually left. It comes down to the goals the individual player wants. Sometimes that goal is to be the best, or the fastest, or whatever. And the game is just a mountain to climb, and if getting to the top of that mountain is all that matters, you're just gonna take a helicopter to the summit. There's nothing wrong with this inherently, and notably, helicopters are still very fun and cool.
You need to stop being such a...
Johnson. Today's monster is that helicopter. ColorPandora is three little guys, and it's extremely hard to top a bunch of little guys working as one in the character archetype tier list. Purely through the spirit of cooperation and obscenely overtuned attacks, ColorPandora fights the odds being 3 to 1. It's one of the only monsters in the game capable of going toe-to-tail with Naga, and while the snake still has the edge, any monster who can boast not getting instantly obliterated by him like a deep-sea billionaire is doing pretty good. Casually, Pandora is sort of a train wreck, at least to the uninitiated. Max life gains and kinda crappy stats otherwise make for a really weird raising experience and can make it tough to get off the ground for new players. Life, luckily, is probably the most powerful stat very early on in the game, so in theory it's actually not too bad, but like we mentioned before, people like doing damage, so they're most likely not focusing on life or doing any real math in their heads about what's going to help them get to B rank and beyond. The abysmal starting stats for power and intelligence don't help much either. A very long lifespan will help fix a lot of these issues, but the bad gains in the late bloomer life type don't help with the immediate feeling of, this thing kinda sucks. Paradoxin and Troron very easily also fix these issues, but all of these remedies require a decent amount of game knowledge to make piloting Pandora less of a chore. Fortunately, all of these things together end up making the little guys one of the easiest and on-rails top tiers to build in the entire game. A billion years of lifespan to fix mistakes and fine-tune your build, the perfect life type for drug training and usable defensive stats in speed and life, mean ColorPandora is positioned as a unique monster in the way it is almost unusable for beginners, but as soon as you get over that first small hump, it's maybe the best easy mode pick for intermediate players. Their techs do a lot of the heavy lifting. Base attack is the best basic attack in the game. Is it really? No. One person said this once in the Discord, and is normally the case with this sort of thing, the community hasn't been able to let it go. Base attack is a fine move, there's nothing wrong with it. It's worth its cost, but not much more. It's only really notable for being a basic on and above average guts rate monster that doesn't completely blow. Tail swing is significantly weaker at only 8 force, and the common belief is that techs that have less than 10 force are hard to use effectively, but tail swing is a basic tech with the potential to wither its own cost and the fastest animation time in the entire game, tied with Naga stat about 1.5 seconds, and an actually absurd 1.1 seconds on a miss. It has easy potential to chunk your opponent's guts on repeated uses with almost no actual risk. Paradoxically, despite its abysmal damage, the speed on it lets tail swing be a tank killer and snuff out speedsters alike. Two swings nearly doubles the damage and is still blistering fast on a miss. It feels a similar all-rounder role akin to something like Gel's whip more than it acts like its predecessor. It can't be spammed like tail whip can, and sometimes this is an issue, but two swings ends up being solid without any real weaknesses beyond that animation time. Giant whip is a fantastic tech. With almost 2-to-1 force to cost ratio, techs in this company usually end up being incredibly inaccurate, but sitting at only -9, Giant Whip ends up being one of the most reliable of its entire archetype. -9 isn't good hit, but 30 force for cost barely higher than an expensive basic tech, Giant Whip is a necessary pickup on most builds. Giant Wheel is more of the same with worse ratios. 42 force and -15 hit is not a fantastic stat line, but 29 cost means the frame 1 swing won't actually put Pandora at too much of a deficit if it misses. Not as risky as it may look at first glance, but it's still not particularly reliable. Cracker is a long animation withering tech, which is usually a pretty bad archetype when the AI is left to their own devices. Cracker probably has much more use in a human-controlled match, but otherwise it ends up being an ostensibly worse version of Plant's Toxic Nectar in almost all fields. Mega Cracker's best attribute is how funny it is as an insult. 40 Withering always has the potential to be oppressive, but the animation time and the cost make it way more of a YOLO option than it should be, especially given it only has like 11 force. Pretty good versus slow guts rate monsters and tanks as a way to increase a lead, but you should probably just use techs that do damage instead. Kamikaze is what you get when you overestimate the drawbacks of an attack and tune the numbers with that in mind. Kamikaze is technically a recoil tech, meaning Pandora will take some damage if it misses, but there's a few reasons why this isn't really much of a drawback. First, the tech has an absurd +20 hit, making it one of the most accurate in the entire game, meaning you'll be hitting way more often than you'll be missing. It's the only tech in the game with recoil that has a high hit percent. And secondly, the recoil damage is negligible. It can make a difference once in a blue moon, but it barely factors into a player's choice of whether or not to pick up Kamikaze. Most of the time, the biggest downside is actually just the animation time, but given the comically overpowered set of parameters for just 28 guts, you'd have to be a Mega Cracker to let that animation time bother you. Spiral Rush is the same cost as Giant Wheel, and they serve the same frame 1 burst potential role. With the bad nature and the stress bonus, you can make Spiral Rush crit nearly half the time, and that's pretty solid. On a crit, it's marginally less powerful than Wheel, so your real choice between the two techs, if you want either, is do you want to gamble on the crit, or do you want to gamble on the low accuracy? Spiral Rush has an interesting quirk where on hit, it moves them all the way back into the 4th slot, but on miss, it puts you point blank. This is an interesting movement technique. I don't know if anyone's really taken advantage of this yet, but I think in player control, you can use it to kind of bypass your opponent's scarier options in slots 2 and 3 and just get up close and personal. Triple Shots is another above curved sharp tech, but like many of Pandora's techs, it also suffers from a very long animation time. 20 force and sharpness and only -2 hit for 18 guts is just a generally good stat line. And this ends up being their most consistent tech in slot 3, if not particularly impactful most of the time. ColorPandora has one special power tech, and that's Meteor Drive. This one really leans into the recoil theme that would eventually become synonymous with Pandora in later games. Huge damage and withering, but you're nearly guaranteed to lose if it misses. Down 50 guts and a ton of life, you have to hope for a miracle to come back. Often this tech is just not worth the insane risk, unless you're in a format where tanks are popular. ColorPandora may not seem like a monster that focuses much on brawn, and it may have a lot of power techs considering. But remember those stat gains? It's dumb as hell too, and as such it's only got 4 intelligence techs. Shotgun is not the most impactful way to open the game, but plus 15 hit and some decent withering is certainly not a bad option. Shotgun openings are pretty consistent and do a good job of setting Pandora up for success later down the line. It's just not a tech you can rely on to carry you through on its own. Mega Shotgun fulfills much of the same role, but with higher damage and cost for a small hit to accuracy. It's good for all the same reasons as Prerequisite is, but it plays more of a middle ground role between it and something like Giant Wheel. Mega Shotgun ends up being moderate damage for lowish risk, which is usually the best type of tech in Monster Rancher 2. Delta Attack is a chain from triple shots, which I guess makes sense thematically, but Jesus, does it ever tank Delta's viability. Having a power attack in the same slot as it means that half the time, if you're building an intelligence build, you're just not going to use the intelligence attack. Delta Attack is not nearly good enough to justify this outside of mixed attacker formats, and even then, I don't know. It's one of the only techs in the game that costs more than 50, which is usually egregious, and unfortunately this is not really an exception. While Delta Attack's numbers are actually very strong and probably do warrant the 55 cost, the issue is that outside of being a round ender, this move really ruins Pandora's ability to keep pace with its opponent. This is a rare tech where the risk is not so much in the cost or the chance of missing, but in how it sets up the rest of the fight. Delta Attack is very accurate, so you're basically cashing out on a sure thing when you use it. The risk is specifically in that it may be used at a time where this isn't going to help much. Another tech that is extremely strong in the hands of the player, but unreliable in the hands of AI because of weird opportunity cost. Vital Ritual is Delta Attack for bastards. 35% less accurate with the trade-off being it steals both life and guts. Vital Ritual can set up Pandora as an unbeatable monster versus tanks, as the amount of guts it steals in anger is enough to refund its entire cost, allowing multiple rituals to be swung consecutively. This makes it the purest form of lockout in the entire game. It's happened to me and it can happen to you. Despite this specific scenario happening more often than you'd think, it still doesn't see much play as it's extremely risky most of the time. They got a ton of different choices to make, from weighing high damage versus high crit rate to extremely focused withering to a myriad of high accuracy options. Pandora has a lot of powerful moves at their disposal, but there's something very unfortunate going on with the tech list. Despite a laundry list of stuff other monsters could desperately use, these 2 techs render the rest obsolete. This is the ColorPandora build, just Kamikaze and Giant Whip. Literally every other choice Pandora has is one made out of want for additional flavor or specific counterpicking, and it doesn't do much to improve the incredible consistency and power level these techs provide. Kamikaze is one of the strongest attacks in the entire game, and Giant Whip is a ton of damage potential for very little cost. This combination of high accuracy and high damage make ColorPandora one of the most consistently powerful monsters in the game and earns it a spot in the top tier where very few monsters can hang. Another interesting thing about ColorPandora is that it is one of the biggest monsters in the arena. The only monster who takes up more physical space in the arena than it is Beaklon. Like, look at this. From round start, if I walk all the way backwards against another ColorPandora, this is as far as I can get. And you almost start in slot 2 when 2 of them fight each other. Peachtree Bug is significantly more powerful due to its guts rate than all the other Pandora options, so it's unilaterally the pick for competitive play when your goal is just to win. A faster guts rate lets it swing more whips with even lower risk, so it speaks for itself. The purebred Pandora still has a decent guts rate, but PTB's is fast enough to allow it to also run a tank build if it wants, which just gives an already powerful mon even more chances to attack as anger becomes viable. Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. So is ColorPandora fun? It's the perfect example of this adage because despite a vast array of interesting and varying techs, one build is extremely dominant. Oh no! Does this make Pandora bad game design? The quote is significantly more profound when you're actually talking about making a game, and I think its nebulous nature outside of that specific context is honestly a lot less important. As a game dev, giving a player multiple outs to a set of challenges keeps the game fresh and makes for a more varied experience. But that doesn't inherently mean the experience is bad with a best solution. Do we as the players of games really need to worry about this? Is anything really lost by certain things being optimal? The quote is not a question in and of itself, but luckily for us outsiders, as the players and specifically not the makers of games, there is an equally profound quote about this exact same thing. Hey everyone, thanks for watching another one of these. It is no longer June, which means I am no longer working a billion hours, and I'm going to be able to make some more videos. So I apologize that this one came out a little late. If you want to support the content, you can help me out on Patreon, or, just chill out in the stream, or in the Discord, or even just like and subscribe. I appreciate all of it. We got some more fun stuff for you coming this summer, so I'm really excited, and I hope you guys stick around.